Welcome back to a mental health break. I'm your host and author of the book, Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health, Vincent A. Lanci.
And I'm Patrick Lewis.
While I was a college student, I was the victim of a hit-and-run accident while on foot. After coming out of a coma and suffering from a traumatic brain injury, or you may know of as a TBI, I soon realized it was time to put my mental health on a very high pedestal. This transformative experience has led me to create this podcast that is all things mental health. Each week, I interview different mental health professionals and advocates from around the world to share their stories relating to mental health. For this week's episode, we have a guest who I connected with through a mutual friend of ours, Tony Alexander. Patrick went through a traumatic experience and now uses his story to help others in similar scenarios. We have been Zooming over the last month, and I learned that he has an incredible story to share with a lot of passion behind it. In addition to his personal experience, he is doing work with a mental health podcast, and he has a few mental health initiatives he's working on. We're going to learn about all of that and more. So allow me to now introduce Patrick Lewis. Patrick, it's great to see you again, and thank you so much for joining for an episode.
Vincent, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Would you mind please now taking the time to introduce yourself to our listeners and sharing part of your story before we dive in and get going, while also please do share your role relating to mental health?
So my story kind of began when I was 5 years old. I was hit by a car. So that's what we share in common. I was hit by a car. I was skateboarding, did not see the car coming, and well, it was a truck. Did not see the truck coming, and the truck won that battle. And so growing up was different for me. I have a perspective of growing up having been 5 when the accident happened, that I'm 35 now, and so it was different growing up. I come from the other end of the spectrum than you, Vincent, where this happened when you were an adult, so you had to relearn everything as an adult, and I had to go through it as a child growing up, and it's a little bit different thing because, as an adults, know that everyone's different. Kids don't necessarily know that. And so that's part of what I'm going to try to use with Way Beyond Measure, the company nonprofit that I'm part of. I'm going to use my story to hopefully, educate kids and let them know that other people are different. Not everyone's going to be the same, but, you still got to treat everyone like you want to be treated. The golden rule. It's basically just the golden rule back at a younger age, teach everyone that.
I was going to say, yeah, we learned that at kindergarten, and unfortunately, a lot of people forget that as we get older. And let's talk about that nonprofit you're with again.
So, nonprofit that I am with is Way Beyond Measure. And it's actually a nonprofit that has been around for going on 10 years now. And pre-pandemic, my best friend, Coach David Verdu, he would go around to schools and do assemblies with this program called the SUSO program. And we have the Think program within that. And it's just teaching, kids, like, before you act, think. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? If it doesn't meet those 5 qualifiers, rethink it and maybe not do it. It's the best way to explain. We're coming out with a virtual program in the next couple of weeks here to get in front of schools. Like, we want to be in all the schools across the country and just help kids know that, it's okay to not go with the herd. Doesn't always have to be groupthink, and you can do you, be you, and know that you are special and be yourself.
Dude, incredibly said. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Very humble to be introduced to you because, like I said, we spoke a few times, and I know we're sharing a similar mission of passionately trying to break down mental health stigma. So I think there will be no better time than now to get into this main event. On each episode, my guest and I will go over this series of questions to help others improve their mental health. You ready to go, Patrick?
I was born ready.
Great. So many would agree that the more common or talked about types of mental health disparities are mood disorders, anxiety disorders, or schizophrenia disorders. Which areas did you come across the most?
Well, given right now that we are focusing on laying the foundation in the K to 5, I think it tends to be, and just from what I've seen as a fairly new observer to this, because this wasn't the way I would always plan on going. But I think, and given today's world with social media being in everyone's face at such a young age, I feel like mood disorders and anxiety disorders are going to be two of the biggest things we face, because you get that anxiety of
Mhm.
people being on social media, seeing their friends do this, seeing their friends do that, and if they're not doing it, then they don't fit it, or and just false reality. Like, it's tough these days. I feel like kids have a lot of anxiety, especially into not knowing, like, with all the rhetoric out there, that it's crazy, and to have to deal with it. I don't think I try to think back to when we were growing up, when
Mhm.
I was 10, 11, 12, high school, never had to worry about this stuff.
Right.
And
Now these
so
kids, you're saying it right, man, because these kids, they have their whole lives out of their hands already. And now they know, go to school, play with your friends, go out of the house a little bit. Now it's just sit there. Their emotions are stunted. Their growth is stunted in many ways. And that was one of my missions with the new book, Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health, to let people know it's okay to have emotions, okay to have feelings. It's okay to talk to somebody, because right now these podcasts play a very large role in my life, because it's like I speak to a therapist each time, and it couldn't come at a better time than during the pandemic for me to actively speak about how to improve my mental health, which is what I'm hoping for with our audience gets out of each episode. And I think the advice you've already shared is right on the way to doing that. But you previewed it a little bit. Let's talk more about that moment where you decided to first take a stance on mental health advocacy, or head down the career as well related to mental health.
well, I don't really think I think it, honestly, and it's kind of cliche-ish, but I feel like it chose me. Like,
Me as well. Yeah.
this right now, Vincent, is a personal growth moment for myself. I have feared being on podcasts, but you and I had a good dialogue before this, and so this is my very first. Like, I've always, from growing up being different, I'm still carrying some of those, like, I'm different, and I'm finally, within the past year, I'm realizing that it's okay. I'm 30 again, I'm 35 now, and I'm just becoming okay with sharing my story, being able to talk about myself, and knowing that I have something to say that will help other people. And that's what I want to do, is just help people. I've always wanted to, I tried doing the whole med school route after getting my master's in biomedical sciences, but me and the med schools, we disagreed. I thought that I could do it. They didn't think I could do it. All right, agree to disagree.
Yeah.
So, it's just always been about helping people. And again, over the past year, I've realized that I have a story that I can use to share with the younger generation, that, like, there's always tomorrow, focus on that. There's always tomorrow, no matter how bad today was. And it's part of it is me taking my own advice and finally being able to do that and realize that, you do you, and you will be okay.
The way you're saying these things, I appreciate so much, because of how much it needs to be heard. If there's a dark day right now, it just means the sun's coming out tomorrow, the sun's coming out the next day. And the fact that you're willing to go out there and spread that awareness is something that not a lot of people do. But especially in this COVID time, and you're focusing on students, I think it's an incredible service you're doing. I certainly see many collaborations with us in the future. If you could pick two here, and I say just two because I want the two most important answers you got for our audience today. Let's talk about two things that you do on a daily or short-term basis, and two things you do with long-term goals in mind that all improve your mental health.
Two short-term things. Well, they all short-term feeds into long-term. It
Yes.
forms patterns and habits. So I tried thinking about this before, and it's listening to your other podcasts, I know what's coming, and it's like, so two short terms, I wanted to be ready, and it's be kind. If you're kind and you spread that kindness throughout your day, that will reflect on other people.
Mhm.
And overall, it will form a better communication. So if you can be kind short term, that begets kindness long term, and it forms that just the pattern of people treating people, going back to one of the first things I said,
Love
the
it.
golden
Yeah.
rule, everyone is just, and then long term, do you, because only you have control over your feelings and how you act and how you respond to certain situations. So long term is just focusing on you, and just know that spending any time focusing on outside opinions and outside thoughts it's a fool's errand, because you're never going to be able to please the masses. And so just, if you can, keep your mindset on you and being the best possible person that you can be. And
Yeah. If you
so,
want to please everyone, I tell people you can be an ice cream man. That job will please everybody. And you also talked about not feeding into others' opinions. You talked about earlier, you mentioned something very similar. And I want to reiterate that to the audience, that if you try to please other people or you go down that route, it is just detrimental, not only to your mental health, but to your future, because every minute you waste allocating time to that is that many minutes you're further away from trying to actually accomplish what you're doing. In this case, making a difference. He's working with kids K-5, and everyone who's listening to this platform can agree how much that is needed. But this is something you also previewed in the beginning. That's why I touched on it. I wanted to hear about your nonprofit, and I know you have some other things in the works. Let's now talk about all the future plans you have right now for raising awareness for mental health.
oh man, so there's just,
I know you got a ton, so let's hear
it's
it,
a
man.
lot of moving pieces right now. Like, we just later today, our fourth episode will come out of our podcast, the Suso podcast. And it's just, we're getting stories from all different places. But so that's just one thing. We have a product launch coming up, or we're starting with K-5 because we want to build that foundation, and
Love it.
eventually we will expand middle school, high school, college, collegiate. We want to reach the mat, and we have a goal to reach the mat. And so it's just, if we can build that foundation young, of like strong inner people, we are going to be
Absolutely.
able to do some really important things mentally for everybody. I mean, even me as an employee, just working with Way Beyond Measure, like over the past year, it's opened up my eyes, and it's definitely helped me grow. And again, I'm 35, I'm still growing. So there's a lot going on with Way Beyond Measure. Keep a lookout for that. Different products. Right now, we're focused on the K-5, but over the next year, we will expand, and we'll just keep building on the foundation that we're laying right now with the different products and whatnot.
Mhm.
And doing this, just talking to other people. Vincent, you got a great voice, a great following, a great story, and it's just finding people that have these stories that are willing to share it and try to be the change we want to see.
Yeah, well, thank you for all those kind words. And it all comes with amazing guests like yourself that come on the show and have the courage and share their humility and vulnerability with others, because everybody's battling something, whether they want to admit it or not. Everybody has some kind of adversity. Maybe some people's adversity is a little less severe. Maybe some people's adversity is family related. Maybe some people is physical, like us. And no matter what, it goes without saying that 2020 taught everybody the importance of story sharing and experience sharing, and how far that someone's journey can take somebody else. You never know what someone else is going through on a bad day. But I think this has to be a perfect segue for the spotlight story, Patrick. Each week, I share a mental health story of someone who is famous, because I want to let you, the listeners, know you are not alone. I want you to understand that even though someone looks like they're healthy from the outside, they may not be on the inside too. And for today's episode, I will introduce the story of another male breaking down these stigmas, an NHL player, Tyler Mott. After he arrived at Canucks camp last year, the doctor who took his physical asked if there's anything else he wants to talk about. Mott paused and then said, "Actually, there is one thing." Next, the words flowed out of his mouth before he considered the significance, as the article puts it. And he said, quote, "Earlier in the summer, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression." Do we have someone for that? The article then describes this moment as where he says he no longer has to hold on to this secret. Although the stigma surrounding mental health in pro sports is slowly eroding, there is still plenty of reasons why athletes choose not to come forward with their disparities, as well as many other individuals. You can think about other workplace professions in the corporate world. People feel they may lose their job, but Tyler now hopes to inspire others by discussing his mental health, similar to you and I. So, Patrick, what do you take away from this story?
Initially, I take away from it is that, like, it's kind of what you just said, and I don't know who Tyler Mott is, or like how, if he's a younger player, older player, but it's and it sucks that it takes, especially men, sometimes longer to get to the part where they're comfortable talking to someone else about something they're feeling inside. And that's the biggest, is like, we've all been there, and like the stigmas, they're stigmas, but you got to take care. Number one, so you got to go against those stigmas. It sounds like Tyler Mott is, ready to do that. He's becoming comfortable with his situation, and now he's willing to talk about it. And given that he has a huge platform, being an NHL hockey player, he's going to use that voice to show that, like you said in the intro, you're not alone. Everyone's got something, and why not talk about it? The stigmas are always going to be there, but you know what else is always going to be there? Other people have had similar situations. So
well said. And I've only had the opportunity to bring on one NHL player, ex-NHL player, who's passionate about mental health. His name is Corey Hirsch. He was a season 2 opener. He was a Rangers goaltender, big Canadian player. He's an announcer out there, and he does now just travels, speaking, sharing his story. So I love, like how you mentioned with the platform. These guys have these professional sports platforms, right? Thousands and thousands and thousands of people look at their page every day. When they take the time to share something positive like this, the benefits are endless. I mean, people look up to, you remember being a child, everybody had a favorite athlete or two, and you look at these guys like they're a godlike figure, right? You're 6, 7 years old. Now you're seeing hockey players, athletes slowly share their stories, celebrities share their stories, regular folks like you and I share our stories, and before you know it, these stigmas will slowly erode. But Patrick, I have to thank you so much for coming on this show today. I know the listeners are going to see all the value in your episode. I loved how you started right in the beginning saying, hey, this is my story. It took me some time, but now that I'm sharing my story, look how much great is coming out of it. And I really appreciate the way and all the perspective you shared with that, because people need to realize the same thing. Don't feel alone. Let's help others not feel alone. I also loved how you resonated with audiences, sharing how you pursued your medical school, but life doesn't always work out the way we plan. You pivoted and you found something that you're so grateful you did. You're a part of this great company here that has so many goals, and I hope to be a part of something you do in the near future. But I have to say it's time for the last word. And this is something I also do on my other podcast, That Entrepreneur Show, because I want our listeners to really get to know my guests. Is there something that you would like to share that we did not touch on yet today?
I feel like we touched on a lot, so I just want to reiterate on the be kind part. Like that, just go every day, be kind, hold the door for someone, ask someone, how their day's going. Be kind, be the change you want to see, because you don't know what that will do. Someone could be having the worst day ever, and you just ask them like, hey, how you doing? Hope you're having a good day. That could be the highlight of their day right there. And that took 3 seconds for me to say. Just be kind and share that kindness, man. Go way beyond measure. That's all we can say. Go way beyond measure.
Well, speaking of way beyond measure, let's now take the time to share both that professional social media podcast and also how our listeners can get in touch with you and interact with you.
Well, I can be found on one platform and one platform only, LinkedIn. I do not have social media. Is not my thing. I leave that up to other people. But Way Beyond Measure can be found at Way Beyond Measure on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on Instagram, and then at our website, waybeyondmeasure.com. If you go there now, if you know kids K to 5, there's free samples on there right now available to try out. See if your parents want to get into their kids' schools. Give us a try, waybeyondmeasure.com.
And it is also social media time for the show, and we're on whichever platform you like to use. We're at A Mental Health Break on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And on Twitter, we're at PodcastsByLanci. So you have updates from this show and that entrepreneur show. Of course, my handles on all social media and YouTube are at Vincent A. Lanci, and my website is vincentalanci.com. If you check out any of my books, DM me. I would love to hear from you. We have Mr. Lanci Talks Mental Health, Left for Dead, A Story of Redemption, and How to Transform Your Mindset When the Norm is Changed. All are on my website now. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate the show 5 stars and continue listening by subscribing. That's all for this week, and I'll see you all on the next episode of A Mental Health Break.